As it's 6:30 p.m., I will call the meeting to order. How'd I do if I hammer thing? Do okay? Okay. Just making sure. Okay. I'd like to start with taking roll. I'll start over on my left.
Larry Crandall, position 4.
Nancy Anderson, position 7.
Frank Blau, chairman.
Shanna Collins.
Brian Garvey.
Okay, thank you very much. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda for the evening?
Yes, sir.
Can I get
Affirmative.
a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
And the agenda is approved. Has everyone approved the minutes? Anybody have any comments about the minutes from February 4th?
I move to have the minutes of the February 4th Planning Commission meeting be approved as distributed.
Second.
Okay, that approves the minutes for February 4th. So now is the time where we have... What's that?
Vote.
Oh, sorry, do I have to vote? Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the minutes and agenda are approved. I'm learning, okay? I'm so nervous. Do the Roberts thing wrong, and then, you know,
This group will probably
keep me in
correct
line.
you.
Yeah, okay, yeah. If I do anything wrong, just, you know. Okay, now is the point in the evening where if you have a non-agenda, that is a topic that we're not discussing this evening, comment to make to the Planning Commission, you have 3 minutes. Seeing as we have no takers for public comment, I will close the public comment for the evening. Get to bang my hammer again. Very excited about that. Do we have a director's report this evening? Okay.
Is on. Thank you. David Pyle, Community Development. So as Chair Blau is aware, the Public Works standards were transmitted for discussion with the City Council this past Tuesday. The Land Use Compatibility Code amendments are planned to be transmitted to the Council on March 1st. You've recently been working on those. The Dimensional Standards Code amendments are planned for transmittal to the Council along with the Marijuana Code amendments pending tonight's discussion on March 15th. We also recently added to the agenda, which is the next topic of discussion on our agenda here, recently added to the Planning Commission work program calendar, a discussion on the city's stormwater policy, regulation, and design standards, which we'll talk about here in just a minute when we talk about our calendar. Finally, we want to remind you that when we're communicating with the official business of the city or of the commission, that we are to use our official Planning Commission email addresses, something that came up, and we just want to make sure we're all aware of that. It's a simple reminder.
And does everyone have a Planning Commission, a city email address to use, and no issues there? Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Okay.
The next item, I believe, is the review of the work program
Okay.
calendar. Which, as part of the report leading up to that, we identified that we've added some items. Okay, yeah, so we have a copy that was issued with the packet. Is this in their is this on their desktop?
Yeah.
Okay.
This version is.
This version is
Yeah.
here.
That version's in the packet. That's the latest version.
Okay, do they have this?
No.
Okay. I'm being informed that you do not have the copy that I'm looking at. In looking ahead into the month of March, because the next meeting is canceled in lieu of a short course on local planning that's optional, I believe. We're looking at a pretty busy March 17th meeting where we're proposing to have a discussion on impact fee deferrals, a discussion on the urban forestry management plan, which we're just now ramping up. It'll be an introduction to that topic. And we're also adding now to the calendar a work session, an update to you on the stormwater, I guess, policies, regulations, and design standards here in the city. which is currently underway with the Public Works Department. So it's an opportunity for you to learn more about it and how it fits into all the other regulations here in the city. It's a real important topic here. We hear a lot about it on in our daily lives in working and planning.
So that's 3 work sessions in the same evening?
As it appears now, we're looking at trying to manage potentially impact fee deferrals, and depending on how ready we are for that one. That's a real short one. It's pretty simple. It's another one that is a conformance amendment to respond to changes in state law. The Urban Forestry Management Plan is just a real high-level overview of what we're doing and how we're starting the program. There'll be a lot more on that in the future. It's going to be a long program. So that's a real sort of simple introduction to that. The one I believe that the more information, the largest item on the agenda will likely be the stormwater update, because the Public Works Department is really trying to keep that moving along, as we are obligated to update our stormwater program here in compliance with the NPDES phases of implementation for different levels of stormwater protection.
And when's the deadline for that?
I'm not sure what the deadline is. I know it's when
Summertime, or I mean?
that they're constantly chasing it, so I believe it's sooner than later.
Okay.
But I could ask that and report back to you on what the deadline for that is.
Comments about that? I would just say that 3 topics in one evening has been challenging to get through in the past, but if the one is just short, it might be okay.
So we'll talk some more internally and determine, you know, if we can contain 2 of the items and really focus on one, that might be best.
Okay.
Well, perhaps talk further at the prep meetings, Frank.
Yeah.
You and Vice Chair.
Okay.
Because this is a draft version now that David is discussing. So
Okay.
we just wanted to put it out to you there, but we do have to talk about this topic moving forward.
Okay.
And also in responding to the stormwater update, we have scheduled the following meeting on April 7th, a public hearing on the comp plan update portion of the stormwater program. So that's sort of the rationale behind trying to front load that, so that we have opportunity to introduce it to you, to discuss it, and then that will lead into a public hearing on the proposed policy updates for the comp plan.
So the way I'm reading this, then, on the 7th, we have 2 public hearings? Okay.
We'll have impact fee deferrals and
Okay.
stormwater.
Potentially, so that's
Okay.
yeah. Again, this is a lot of moving pieces, and we're trying to forecast out into the summer what we're trying to get done and whether we can get stuff through, and what affects other items that other departments are working on.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Between March 17th and April 7th, is there any chance of fitting in an extra meeting? I mean, there's 3, I'd prefer not to have the 3 in one evening, personally, but just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I think rather than having an extra meeting, and I don't know what the preference of the commission is, but rather than having an extra meeting, we would probably look at ways to manage the level of information we're discussing. And for example, the Urban Forestry Management Plan, that is one that we'll have to enter into lightly, because there's a lot of detail and a lot of moving pieces to that. And we're going to have many nights to discuss that in the upcoming years. As it's a big topic and one that we want to make sure we're doing right. It's an amazing resource we have here in this city, and it's one also that affects people in their day-to-day lives quite a bit.
I would say, too, we've deferred a lot of other discussions to that urban forestry management plan. When things come up, we're like, well, we'll deal with it there. So it's good to get into some of the meat on that as soon as possible. Okay. Is that it for the calendar? Do we have any known absences for commissioners that we know of for the dates on this calendar? Okay. Just like to stay out in front of that if we can.
A reminder about the short course on local planning. There's just a few of you that haven't signed up. So just let me know, and
Okay.
sign them up. It's getting very busy. Okay, that's at March the 2nd at Bellevue. Commission just need to let me know if they need to sign up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Which takes us to old business. And the old business is marijuana. And that'll turn it over to the staff for presentation.
Mike?
Good evening. I am going to briefly run through a PowerPoint that was given at the February 4th Planning Commission meeting. There haven't been any major updates since we met last, so it's all pretty basic still. So a little bit of background on Sammamish's regulation. In 2011 through 2014, there were a series of medical and recreational marijuana moratoriums that were extended. And then on October 2014, those moratoriums ended and the municipal code was amended to prohibit all marijuana-related land uses. So the main change to state law was that medical marijuana was brought into the same regulatory structure as recreational. Previously, medical marijuana existed as sort of an unregulated entity, and now it will be brought under the control of the Liquor and Cannabis Board. So a number of changes are happening on July 1st, 2016. The collective garden provisions will be eliminated. The cooperatives will be allowed, and cooperatives are basically a scaled back collective garden. It's going to be regulated, unlike the collective gardens, and it will only allow a maximum of 4 patients. Also on July 1st, licensed marijuana retailers may sell medical marijuana with an endorsement. So the collective gardens, which are being repealed, may either become cooperatives, or if they'd like to sell marijuana, they can become a licensed marijuana retailer. Also, the Liquor Control Board was renamed the Liquor and Cannabis Board. The Liquor and Cannabis Board received responsibility for regulation of medical marijuana, and also a tax revenue sharing program was established for those jurisdictions that do not prohibit marijuana businesses. Sammamish does prohibit marijuana, so we would not receive any tax revenue under this program. So the amendments that are necessary to conform to state law, the first section that would be amended is 21A15 and 21B15, the definition sections. We would add definitions for cooperative, marijuana concentrates, and Liquor and Cannabis Board. Additionally, we would update existing marijuana definitions. The next sections that would be amended are 21A20 and 21B20, permitted uses. These contain the land use tables. So the first thing that would be amended are adding cooperatives into the land use tables. 2, we'd rearrange the existing marijuana-related land uses. So for example, marijuana producers and marijuana processors are currently listed under retail land uses when they're actually a manufacturing land use. So there's just some rearranging there. 3, we'd add footnotes prohibiting marijuana-related land uses in all zones to cover all the bases. And 4, edit the tables in 21A20 to show prohibited uses with an X instead of a blank space. And this is for consistency with 21B20, which shows prohibited uses with an X. And that last point is shown here. So 21A20 would receive a new category under the key for prohibited uses, shown with an X, and that would fill in all the previously blank spaces. Finally, the home business section of 21A65050 would be amended, and that's just to add cooperatives to the list of prohibited home businesses, because under state law, the cooperatives must be located in the domicile of one of the participants. So tonight, there will be a public hearing and deliberation, and on March 15th, the City Council would receive the Planning Commission's recommendation and hold a public hearing.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
At this point, it feels like a rather academic question, but the regulation about the number of people that can be serviced by a cooperative,
Right.
which is 4, one of which it has to be in their domicile, right?
Right.
How does that differ from the previous definition of collective garden? I think of collective garden as maybe a bigger space, and if you had shared property, could you divide it into a cooperative? I mean, do they have to be a certain distance from each other in order for them to be distinctly separate entities? Or I'm just, again, it's probably academic at this point, but I'm just kind of curious.
I believe the collective garden regulations changed over the years, but the most recent iteration has a maximum of 10 patients that may be served. So this scales that back to 4. And often the collective gardens turned into what we know as dispensaries, which is a retail use, and they were never intended to sell marijuana. It was just strictly for the members of the collective garden to sort of grow together and just sort of pool their resources, not to sell to outside people. But through some sort of loopholes, they figured out a way to sort of skirt the maximum number of patients requirements. There's also a requirement that you have a designated provider, sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. You can either have a patient or a designated provider be part of these collective gardens. So a designated provider would be for somebody who can't get the marijuana for themselves for whatever reason. They would go through their designated provider to get the marijuana they need. But the dispensaries would use designated providers, and then each new person that would come in to the dispensary would be a new patient. And it's, I'm probably not explaining this correctly, and maybe I shouldn't go into too much detail because I read this online. But basically, you would get 10 patients, and then as a new one came in, the 10th one would be knocked off the list, and then the person that came in would become patient number 1, and that's how they kind of served it in a retail way. So they were obviously unregulated, and I think it was up to the cities to regulate these collective gardens, whereas the cooperatives will now be under the control of the Liquor and Cannabis Board.
Okay. Thank you. Good explanation of a complex topic.
Thank you.
I also wanted, before we proceed, draw your attention to, thank you,
Yeah.
a privileged legal opinion that's on your desk packet. And if you want to take a minute to read through it, happy to provide the time. Our intent here is not to spring this on you at the last minute. It's a question that had been asked at the previous meeting. And we wanted to do a little more backup on that, or follow up on that with our legal counsel. So they provided us with an opinion. So if you'd like to take a minute and read through it, this would be a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, I think I read through, I think you can pretty much jump straight to the conclusion to get where it's going. And that is, and just for the record, I'll say that there's no language in the CPPA that expressly prohibits cities from regulating medical marijuana activities. However, the legislature had removed the provision that previously did grant that authority. So there's kind of like a, which is the way to come down on this. And the conclusion of the legal review is it says whether the act preempts cities from adopting zoning regulations or licensing requirements will have to be determined through litigation in the courts. So basically what we're saying is this is probably still to be resolved. And in our meeting, was it last week when we met? I think I kind of felt the same way, that I would like to revisit this as the law progresses in the future, and have some mechanism for that, because I think it is going to evolve probably quicker than we think.
This is definitely a wait and see situation.
Yeah.
And I also I printed out some copies of a section of our code that Mike referenced in his presentation. This is, and I'll get back to the mic here. The structure of the current code, the lead in to each of the sections that we're discussing for amendment here, identifies that all land uses and development shall be compliant with any applicable state or federal law. So in this case, it's a murky situation because we have a federal law where a substance is being controlled as a
Schedule 1 substance.
Schedule 1 substance, and that's evolving over time. And so as these things evolve, it's uncharted territory, and how they relate to each other. So if we ever were to embark on a program wherein we are discussing appropriately zoning the location of these types of, whether it's a producer, a retailer, et cetera, the first thing we would have to do is discuss amending this section here that's highlighted, dependent on what state and federal law says. So what we don't want to do is create a situation where we're allowing something, but it's either prohibited or otherwise regulated at a different level somewhere else. It adds complexity because our code actually prohibits us from doing that.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Is it any more for your presentation?
That's it, we're done?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we'd like to do now, this is a slight change to our process from the way we've done things in the past. We are going to be having the public comment before our deliberation. And so I would, if you have public comment on this issue, you get 7 minutes. And do we have a sign-up sheet? Was there anything on the sign-up sheet? Okay. Okay, thank you. Does anyone wish to say anything? Okay. That being said, then I will close the public comment period. Do we receive any written comment on this topic? Okay. Okay, then I will close the public comment on this, and we can move to commission deliberation.
Well, I have a question. And of course, with what you were just talking about, as things change and evolve, and even from the federal level, I mean, it is kind of so backwards, isn't it, sometimes in a situation like this? So what triggers this coming back to us? Is it something that you're advised on as far as a law change or the result of a lawsuit settlement or?
Yeah, so we keep track of court cases, legal opinions, things that are occurring in the landscape sort of ahead of us, right? And our legal advisors pay real close attention to that. So we would generally hear from legal counsel that, hey, there's a court case underway that might affect your ability to regulate this, marijuana, or some other issue in the city. And they would typically advise us that we want to consider tracking that and consider putting on our work program some sort of code update to respond to some legal finding or a change in how this is being handled. I think the wait and see situation here is that if there was direction from the courts as to the city's ability to regulate something like this, we would want to respond and to be able to embark on an appropriate planning effort to attempt to reasonably cite these types of uses in the city. And that's not something we want to do just in a real knee-jerk reaction. We'd rather do it in a premeditated, deliberate fashion where we could engage the population or the citizenry appropriately and get appropriate feedback and really try to make something that would work out of it.
I like this wait and see because I'm sitting here and when we think back with the number of other issues that staff is working on and city council is looking at, by moving this regulation and updating it to coincide with the state rules and regulations seems like a smart thing to do right now. And reading the papers, listening to the news, there will probably be further involvement in other cities and court actions, things like that. So I like this wait and see and have compliance with the state's regulations. And
So I think what we need next then is a motion to approve the code as amended here this evening.
I would move to have the code as presented approved by the Planning Commission.
Second.
And I believe we should take a vote on that. And so all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
So next steps would be putting together a packet for, to take to city council and a deck of some sort that we would use to present this, probably similar to the one you showed us here, on the 15th of March.
Great, yeah. There's a draft ordinance here that we're actually going to be proceeding with processing SEPA at this point. That's the next step for us internally. So that'll be issued probably next week. Then there's a 14-day comment period on that. If anybody has any comments on that, then we will address them. If not, then that SEPA threshold determination will stand, and then it will proceed into the meeting on March 15th.
So there's no additional deliberation for this body on this issue?
Not at this point.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else have anything else this evening? Okay.
No.
Then,
I move the meeting be adjourned.
Second.
all in favor? Oh. Getting a specific aye there, okay. And with that, I will close what is probably our shortest meeting of the year at 6:55 PM. Thank you.
I've attended